Kia ora koutou. Welcome to our cafe session all about structured maths and how that is working out for our neurodivergent learners. Thank you for spending some time with me whenever it is you are watching. Ko Madeleine Armstrong Wilcox toku ingoa. I'm the head of programs here at the Neurodiversity in Education Project, and we are proud to be working with you building a neuro-inclusive school. A karakia as we begin, tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, humie hui tai kie. Welcome everyone. Okay, in this session, we spent some time sharing our experiences so far in implementing a structured maths approach. This session is not about unpacking what structured maths is and isn't, or unpacking our curriculum around maths. It's not about recommending or working through a particular resource that has been provided. It's just about how we can make structured maths work in a neuro-inclusive school so that it works for our neurodivergent learners. If you do have questions about a structured maths approach or about the maths resources you are using in your school, talk to your maths leader or talk to your professional learning provider as a great source of information on those things. Having said that, it's actually really important to note that unlike structured literacy, there isn't a firm and clear research base around structured maths that actually what the Ministry of Education has done in thinking about taking a structured approach to maths is overlaid some of the lessons we've learned around structured literacy into maths, that it's really important to take a systematic approach, to be really explicit, to outline the learning that matters and make sure that no one misses out. So in this session, just take a moment now and hit pause in a minute if that helps to gather your thoughts. What has happened so far for you in implementing a structured maths approach? What are your experiences so far as a teacher? Or if you are in a leadership position or you are supporting teachers, what have your experiences been in that role? What are your students experiencing? Have you asked them? Or what are you noticing in your students, and in particular, your neurodivergent students? What are you noticing about the ways they are responding? What seems to be working well for them in a structured maths approach? And also, what doesn't seem to be working well for them? Have you asked them? It's a great place to start. What is it that really seems to make kids light up in your structured maths implementation? And what seems to make them roll their eyes or shut down or get frustrated or anxious? So take a moment to think through some of those things. Let your mind generate what's on top, what's underneath, what you might want to find out. Hit pause, come back when you're ready. Okay. So let's connect some of those ideas with some of the things that we know about neurodivergent learners. So I'll just start back at the basics. Some of our terminology that we cover each time in our cafe sessions, that the idea of neurodiversity is that all of our brains are different. They all do experience the world, our classrooms, the sensory input, the social input. They experience those things differently and uniquely, and that is the norm. Yes, there is basic underlying shared neurological architecture that's basically the same for everyone, but the way we construct our learning is quite individual. And that's normal. That difference is absolutely the norm, and everybody involved in education needs to get that, not just the adults, but the kids too. And also that neurodivergence, we use that term to refer to specific brain-based differences, and we can notice those brain-based differences by observing students and their characteristics, not just by waiting for a diagnosis on a piece of paper to land in our laps, literally or metaphorically. Having said that, I do in this session just want us to touch on some specific forms of neurodivergence as they impact maths learning in particular. The obvious place to start is obviously dyscalculia, which is most likely due to brain-based differences. The neuroscience is a little bit up and down on this, but it's obviously most likely due to brain-based differences. One of the key differences is observable from infancy, which is what we know about other forms of neurodivergence also. And it's this underlying issue with quantification. And quantification is that idea that even as really small infants, we can look at things and decide if there are no things, a thing, or lots of things. That idea that we can distinguish between different quantities at a really basic level, none, one, some, right? That in people with dyscalculia, that underlying quantification is really problematic. And obviously, that ability to determine quantity kind of sits underneath all other numeracy skills. All right, so it's underneath counting, it's underneath knowing the difference between one and none. It is absolutely fundamental to ongoing numeracy. So if you have a problem with quantification, you're going to have difficulty with maths learning later. So those are two quite specific issues with dyscalculia. But there's also a suggestion that people with dyscalculia apply really creative strategies to their maths learning and to their mathematical thinking. So there may be enhanced creativity going on as well. And obviously what this implies is that actually people with dyscalculia need quite different instruction in maths. They're going to have to spend probably a lot of time in that basic fundamental level and getting those things secure, as well as obviously lots of other work around developing numeracy skills. So next special case around maths and neurodivergence is our autistic kids. Again, autism is a brain-based difference. Some of those differences may impact on maths. It is posited that many of our autistic kids have a real strength in pattern recognition, and that is a huge transferable strength into the field of maths, and that our autistic kids have a preference for analytic mathematical strategies rather than invented strategies or novel strategies. They like the kind of brute force analysis of number and manipulation of number at that analytical level rather than at a creative or invented level. And that those are great strengths. Those are great things to have in terms of maths learning. We also know that many people with autism have some issues or challenges around communication or language use. This implies for us as teachers that for autistic learners, very highly socialized maths can be a massive challenge for them. The maths isn't the challenge, the social aspect is the challenge. And as teachers, we probably need to be quite careful around maths learning, making sure we're not making it always social, putting up that barrier for maths learning. We also know that our autistic children love predictability, routine, stability, which is why a structured approach is really top notch for many of our autistic kids. They prefer predictable mathematical contexts, not novel contexts. We're going to come back to this idea of predictable contexts a little bit later, but for now, it's a definite preference. Predictable contexts rather than always landing in those purely novel, brand new contexts. Now, our gifted kids, also a group with brain-based differences, are going to have faster, much more advanced acquisition of skills in maths, or are likely to. They're likely to make those leaps in judgment, leaps in understanding, but may not be able to describe those leaps easily. And when they can't describe those leaps easily, they're intuiting their maths knowledge. They're taking in a lot of information and putting it all together very quickly. In terms of what we do in our classrooms about that, we increase the level of challenge and complexity so that those leaps are harder to make, so that we can get those brains processing more slowly, but we have to give them enhanced challenge in order to do that. Another thing we know about our gifted kids is they often have spiky profiles, so they don't develop really nicely and evenly like this, which would be easy. But often their procedural knowledge and their conceptual knowledge in maths kind of, one takes a big leap and the other stays a bit slower, and then the other takes a big leap, and then that it's quite an imperfect balance of procedural knowledge versus conceptual knowledge. They're not going to be at the same point. We can't let one hold the other back. We have to respond to those kids at the higher of the two sets of understandings. And big idea about our neurodivergent learners is around this idea that neuroinclusion is all about recognizing those brain-based differences, being alert to them, supporting all of our learners to succeed in whatever ways that help them succeed, and celebrating those differences as well. But and it's always the big but, how do we actually do that? How do we support all of the different brains that we have within the structured approach to maths? So we've got some ideas on that. 3 big ideas around things that might work. Number 1, we support attention and focus very carefully and very strategically. We'll dig into each of these ideas in a minute. We take an explicit approach, but we also don't forget to build in rich and authentic contexts, and we do those 2 things together and carefully. We also know that we need to flex within our structured framework. We'll come to each of those. Okay, so some strategies for managing attention and focus. As in all of the things we do in our classrooms, it's important to zoom kids' attention in to what matters most for this lesson. Maths is maths. Maths is not English. Maths is not writing. Maths is not handwriting. Maths is not rolling up your book. Let's focus on the most important mathematical content that's going on in this lesson and really help kids attend to that. When you have a whole lot of mathematical equipment, if you're using just one thing, maybe you're just using your, clicko triangle connectors, that's the only equipment available for this lesson, or the only equipment that's in kids' eye line for this lesson. We don't need everything out all at once if we're just focusing on triangles. Part of that bringing attention to what matters is limiting the visual input in a lesson. So instead of having a display of all of the number bonds to 10, for instance, in a junior classroom, or every formula that we're going to use in geometry this year in a senior classroom, we just strip those things off the wall for now, put them in a basket and pull out the exact thing we need, the exact visual scaffold or a beautiful poster or whatever it is for this lesson. And that gets put on the board or that gets photocopied and put into books. That one thing that's most important for right now is what we're focusing our attention on, and that includes our visual attention. This is so important for so many neurodivergent learners. Okay, practice is obviously huge in maths. We do need to get kids practicing those procedures and practicing them until they stick, and practicing them in new contexts and old contexts and hard versions and easy versions and all of those things. But some of our kids need less practice, our gifted kids in particular. Too much practice for our gifted kids, it goes out the window. It doesn't sink in, it doesn't stick. For our kids with ADHD, too much practice that's all same. You're not going to hold that attention. They need spicy practice, things that are varied and exciting and interesting. And each practice is just a tiny little bit different to keep those brains kind of firing and those little dopamine circuits working really well. For our autistic kids, understanding the why for a lot of practice really helps them. And the why around practice can't be because you need it, because it's in the book, because I said so, because it's on the test, because it's useful. That doesn't count as useful reasons. But for instance, times table fluency, explaining why that is important could include things like, well, having these facts at your fingertips in your brain means that when you are mentally calculating something, you can do it really quickly and really efficiently, which means you're going to solve problems more quickly, more efficiently, with less effort. You see the difference between that explanation and because you need to, that explaining the why is really important. Also just here, I want to mention the kind of special case of maths anxiety, because that does interrupt attention and focus. Kids cannot give their full and wholehearted attention and focus if they're feeling anxious. Maths anxiety has been fairly well researched, but some of that research has suggested that timed tests and tests in general create maths anxiety. The link between timed tests or tests and maths anxiety actually isn't as clear as researchers once thought. Maths anxiety, it's now thought, develops from lack of success. Pure and simple. In the very first instance, it's lack of success that causes that anxiety, and then it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? I'm not doing very well. I feel really anxious, therefore I'm not doing really well. Now I feel more anxious. Now I'm doing less well. So we need to step back and create success. So just like with structured literacy, we should be pitching our practice at a high level of success for kids rather than a high level of stress or non-success. So success always breeds success, and success breeds confidence, not vice versa. All right, so we have to build in that just right level of success for kids. Okay, we also in our maths lessons want both explicit instruction and rich contexts that are authentic and meaningful and applied. It is not a case of one or the other, and they should not be alone. We should not only be doing explicit instruction or contextually rich instruction. Both are needed in every lesson. There's a bit of a tension here in our thinking about the order in which we do explicit versus rich instruction, because in our Curriculum. It suggests that we use rich contexts as a motivational hook at the start of a lesson. Interestingly, for kids who have dyscalculia, maths anxiety, or autism, using an open, rich, authentic context at the start of a lesson does not set them up for success at all. It is actually the very opposite. And this great quote here from Carl Hendricks talked about when we do that, we need to really think through, are we sending kids off on a scavenger hunt with no map? Right? Are we giving them this wild task that they have no actual map, no guide for how to complete? In more formal terms, he's asking, are we imposing additional burden on that thinking that actually doesn't work for their neurological profile? It's really, really well worth considering. A different approach, instead of using a contextual hook as motivation at the start of a lesson, do some knowledge building first at a success level. So do a recap of something we already know, we already have success in, then move into the rich context so we can apply that knowledge to real life. And then we can go back and say, look at that. We used this thing we know about finding perimeter in this rich context. So it's knowledge, application knowledge is a structure in a lesson. And that way we're building procedures, that procedural knowledge, and we're building conceptual knowledge. How does this actually work in the real world and why does it matter? Okay. It's really important that we are not metaphorically sending kids off on this scavenger hunt, and that this structure, knowledge, then application, then knowledge, actually does work beautifully for neurodivergent brains of all sorts. And the other thing to note in terms of explicit and rich instruction is that we need to make sure that in that application zone that needs to happen in every lesson, not just some lessons, not just for your fast finishes and not just on a Friday when it's Friday fun day, that we're making sure that the maths in the contextually rich application is still first, the easy point of access, that we're removing barriers around language, around a inaccessible context that no one actually understands. Great example, teenager in a contextually rich task was given a task about finding change for money, and it was meant to be a numeracy task, but actually, do teenagers use notes and coins? Teenagers look at this task and go, well, it doesn't make any sense to me. That is not a context that I am using, familiar with in my daily life. So in that situation, the context is a barrier to the maths. So let's really make sure that the context, the language, the social skills, etc., aren't putting up big barriers to either explicit or rich instruction. Okay. Third way we can really support our neurodivergent learners, and we cannot forget this, and this is embedded in our curriculum, that even within a whole class structured systematic approach to maths, we still need to be able to flex. Our new curriculum is utterly explicit around this. We still need to have a mix of whole class, small group, paired, individual opportunities for students. We still need to plan inclusively to make sure that all of our brains are catered for. We can still use flexible groups. We can still use flexible access. So if you have a year 3-4 class, you should be year 3 and 4ing your work, not here's the year 3 and here's the year 4. but operate more flexibly with your resources. Remember, the provided resources that you have are just that, provided resources. Teachers are great at finding other resources that work in their contexts. Let's not lose that. You can also be strategic. If you haven't got resources that you think work well enough, you can be really strategic in your use of AI to differentiate some resources and train it well so that you're saying, here's our concept, our mathematical concept. Here's the context we're working with. Can you generate me some ideas for students at this level, and this level that we can all use? And that's that idea that you're teaching the whole class the same mathematical concept, but you're varying the content based on what they need. And you can do that in a whole class setting when you group flexibly for instruction. It's also important that you manage the complexity so that some students are being stretched and some are just at that level of perfect level of challenge for them. It's hard to find a perfect level of challenge, but so that everyone can experience success that they still have to work at, not just 100 out of 100 every time and not being stretched, and not 0 out of 100 every time because this maths is inaccessible to my brain. All right, so we have to manage that level of complexity so that everyone gets some success. Okay, 3 big ideas: attention and focus, explicit and rich instruction used strategically, and thirdly, be flexible in your framework. It's right there in the curriculum. Take a moment now to just let some of those ideas sink in, make some notes in whatever way works for you about what's one neuro-inclusive takeaway, one thing you could try in your classroom straight away. Grab your phone, click on our QR code here, leave us some feedback. It really helps us understand what you need and what you want and how we might best support you. While you're doing that, I'll just let you know that if you want support for your school or your cluster or perhaps your RTLB group, just get in touch with us on our website, which is neurodiversity.org.nz/BNS. Get in touch with us and let's see what we can work out. We're really happy to come and work with you more closely. And a karakia as we finish off. Oh, that's what I've just said. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā. Mana ki tia mai mā katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, au ki te aorangi. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I hope you have got some neuro-inclusive takeaways to apply to structured maths and your neurodivergent learners. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.